Well, hi again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. Today, we have a very special guest, but before we bring Mike McCoy on, I do want to say thank you to Logan Landers, our producer and engineer, and our co-host and founder, Vincent Turner. Vincent, we're able to have a little bit of royalty in the house. Whether you like the convicts or the Catholics, it doesn't matter. It's one or the other. We've got one of the Catholics with us today, and Mike McCoy. An old Notre Dame, an NFL veteran of 14 years, Mike? You were on many rosters, and you got to play quite a long time in the National Football League.
Yes, that's for sure. 7 with Green Bay, 2 with the Raiders under John Madden, then 2 with the New York Giants. So I got 11 in. I would have loved to have gotten 14 in, but I just couldn't get it past 11.
Yeah, you got to get that one more training camp in. You want to do that. Yeah. But Vincent, obviously, Mike is one of those guys that has such a tremendous history. We're going to bring that out of him here today. He played in one of the greatest games in NCAA history, but he also played in several other meaningful games that we're going to talk about as well. But Vincent, your first thoughts about, we bring in Mike McCoy.
Well, when you grow up, as I did in Memphis, Tennessee, as a 6-year-old, and the first college game that you watch was Notre Dame and Michigan State, it can't get no better. Right now, with Mr. McCoy on, I'm dreaming because it's a dream come true. And when you think about Notre Dame football, I don't care if you're African-American. I don't care if you Hispanic or you a white gentleman. Make no mistake. College football is all about Notre Dame. The Four Horsemen, Newt Rodney, Elmer Layton, Paul Horning, Alan Page. Let's get this party started because we got Notre Dame royalty in the house. Back to you, Mr. Harper LeBel.
Well, absolutely. Mike, it didn't start at Notre Dame. It started in Erie, Pennsylvania. Now, when you were a young man growing up, you're always bigger than most of the kids that were your age. Was it fishing? Was it playing in the snow? Was there hockey involved in your early life? Tell us a little bit about growing up.
What was involved in my early life was Twinkies and milkshakes. So
there you go.
When I was in 5th grade, I was 5'6", 185 pounds. And my grandfather had a pop shop, a beverage shop at the time. So we drank a lot of pop, a lot of sugar in it. So I got heavy pretty quickly. I didn't even play football because I was overweight for the Little Gritter League in Erie, the Catholic Little Gritter League. Played a little baseball and basketball, and that was about it. Grew up in Lake Erie, fished with my grandfather in a little 16-foot aluminum outboard motor on the lake and catching the perch. And at that time, you could put a pole down with nothing on the hook, and you catch fish like crazy. But the lake has been back the last 20 years. It's incredible. So as a matter of fact, my freshman year, I was in the seminary studying to be a priest. So I didn't go to Cathedral Prep until my sophomore year in high school. And that's really when I started playing football.
Interesting. Well, born in 1948, so it was really a recovery time. You're a baby boomer, if you will. Yep. And growing up in that early area, I guess Elvis and Chuck Berry and Little Richard were some of the early hits that you would listen to. But talk a little bit more about, just academics. What was it about school that you liked other than little Susie next door? You had Jimmy and Bobby and getting a chance to play all over the place. Talk a little bit about the Erie, Pennsylvania lifestyle for you.
Well, about 3rd grade, we moved in with my grandparents. My dad made some bad choices, so we moved in with them, and they were great people, John and Alice Spadaga. My grandfather came over from Poland when he was 18 years old in 1908 to avoid the Russian army. So he's first-generation immigrant. Okay. And my grandmother from Buffalo, Sobolewski. So we grew up with them, and they were great people. And I went to St. John the Baptist grade school. I was an altar boy. I snuck some of the wine once in a while out of the state. It really wasn't very good wine at the time. And academically, it was fine. I don't remember too much about grade school as far as academics. But then I made a decision to go to the seminary. So I was still, I played basketball in grade school and a little bit of baseball, and that was about it. Okay. So I went to St. Mark's Seminary my freshman year and, played basketball up there, and I had Latin. So that was an interesting subject, taking Latin for the first time, and had a chance to be at the seminary. Then I made a decision. I said, this is not for me, and I transferred. And I didn't make that decision until July before my sophomore year. And Cathedral Prep had 1,200 boys. It was an all-boys school. Ooh. and I was denied. I sent my application in, seminarian student, and I was going to go to Academy High School in Erie, which my mother went to. And at that time, and even now, Academy is still a great public school. It's a charter school in Erie. And that was where my neighborhood was. And a couple of my friends were at Academy, and some were at prep at the time. And in July, I got a phone call, said I've been accepted into Cathedral Prep, which I was excited about. And the parish at that time actually helped pay some of the tuition at prep. And years later, I found out why I was let in, because they were packed. And somebody got to Monsignor McDonald, who was the headmaster at the time, said, "There's a seminarian student who wants to transfer here." My understanding of the story was that, oh, we don't need those sissy seminarian students. And then he said, well, this sissy seminarian student has a 92 average. He's 6'3", 240 pounds. And he may play football, and he has size 15 shoes. So I was in, and went to prep and started JVs, because I literally started on the JV team as a fullback, because the varsity was out at Camp Notre Dame for their summer camp. So that's really how my football started. I played we had a little football team at the seminary, but it wasn't really much. So it wasn't really real football until my sophomore year in high school. So academically, prep was obviously a cathedral preparatory school. Very, very rigorous academics. I would say my toughest subject was physics. I just couldn't comprehend physics. Now, biology and calculus was another one at Notre Dame. But so we studied a lot, and we had a lot of help, and it was an all boys school, so it was a tremendous experience for me.
Well, I always look at it this way, Mike. By the way, first, did you learn to congregate the verb to be eu, etus? All the Latin.
Oh, goodness, I'm impressed.
There's nothing that easy about doing that when you're trying to break it down. But as many Latin students would say, hey, it's the root language of pretty much the rest of the world in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. Absolutely. I learned this way at an all-boy Catholic school when I was growing up. It wasn't until afterwards, but I didn't have to worry about what I smelled like, how I looked, or how I dressed. You either liked me or didn't like me because of who I was, not because I was trying to impress a girl or anyone else there. Was there any sense like that where you just learned your own character and you learned to like who you were for what you were?
Yeah. Well, at prep, we had a coat and tie and jacket, so everybody had to wear that.
Sure.
And I always took a shower every other day. So I don't know about you, Harper, but there were no girls in my school. It was an all boys school. So I guess the Catholic school you went to was co-ed.
No, not when I went there. No, I'm saying, so I didn't have to worry about any of that stuff. If my hair was a mess and someone says, hey, your hair's a mess, I don't care. I didn't care. I didn't care about any of that stuff.
I kind of cared, because my mother's a big Polish lady. She let me go out of the house unless I looked okay.
All right.
Smelled okay. So I didn't have to worry about that like you did. But no, there was two Catholic girls' schools in Erie, St. Ben's at the time, in Villa. But I didn't have any time. I had maybe 3 dates in high school, and that was about it. It was football and athletics and basketball and wrestling and track and water polo. So I played all these different sports when I was there. So I was a pretty busy guy. And then you had 2 to 3 hours worth of homework a night.
Yeah, no kidding. All kinds of academic work that has to get done in order for you to be able to stay on the court or even in the pool, as you mentioned. You mentioned your mother and the Polish roots and stuff like that. The limited background that I have is, if you brought a friend over, they didn't eat till they were full. They ate until mom or grandpa said, all right, now it's time you can get up. Any of that with the McCoy family growing up, where food was a part of your life?
Oh, gosh, yeah, because, everything was prepared. We had fresh vegetables, and we made our own sausage. Not that we killed a pig or anything, but we ground it, and I remember putting it into a grinder and putting the sausage in a casing and smashed the potatoes with one of these smashers. We did all that. The Polish food was incredibly good and also very fattening. My dad was an Irish guy, but I didn't know too much about my dad's family. So it was pretty much the Polish family that I grew up with, not only in Erie, but also in Buffalo, because that's where a lot of the Polish people are also. And we went to Buffalo.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, but I tell you what, though, Easter was incredible. And then, Christmas Eve, we'd open up our presents at 5, 6 o'clock, and you didn't eat anything because you had to go to mass, receive communion. The drill, midnight mass, get back about 2 o'clock. And we had this dining room table just full of food from 2 to 4 o'clock. I remember coming back my freshman year over Christmas, And I put on like 25 pounds in like about 10 days. It was amazing. Yeah.
Well, before we get into Notre Dame, let's talk a little bit about the high school experience for you.
Right.
When did you start to find out that what you were doing was good enough to maybe get to that next level? Was that your
Yeah,
junior?
because my family, my sister was probably the only one that went to college. She went to a Polish National Alliance College in Cambridge Springs. But other than that, nobody in my extended family ever went to college. And my uncle was in World War II. He came back and ran the business with my grandfather. My dad, I think, maybe finished 8th grade or sophomore in high school, and ended up getting his GED later on. But so that wasn't even out there for us to even envision or have as a goal. So I met a guy named Tony Zambrowski my sophomore year, and he was the line coach at Notre Dame, or at the Cathedral Prep High School, but he also played for Frank Leahy back in the late 50s. And he came back to Erie, and the early 50s. He came back to Erie, and he stayed at Cathedral Prep for 50 years. He became a coach and phys ed teacher. And Tony was the one who started putting that little thought into my brain about playing football and doing what I need to do. And he encouraged me to go out for wrestling after my sophomore year, because I was on the JV team for 2 weeks. They didn't know what to do with me. I didn't know what to do. And so they just play fullback. So I did. And we had 2 scrimmages against General McLean and another public school. And I probably had like 100 yards rushing, just running up the middle. And so when I came back, Coach Zambrowski came look at me, and he moved me up to varsity right away. And put me at nose tackle. He said, just go right or left. That's all you have to do. And that's what I did my sophomore year. I played a little bit of offense. That was about it. But one quick story, if we have time, when he brought me up, and I really feel, looking back at my career, that if I didn't go through this one situation, I don't know if I would have continued to play football or been any good at it, because self-esteem at the time just wasn't there. I mean, I was a big kid. I didn't know what kind of athletic ability I had. And a lot of people saw it, but I didn't see it. So when he moved me up, he took me off to the side, and he showed me how to get down in a stance. He showed me how to hit the sled. Oh, there he is. You guys are amazing. Wow. And brings back a lot of memories. And he showed me, the proper stance, and we hit the sled for like 10 or 15 minutes. And then he showed me how to pass block. At the time, you had to put your hands on your jersey. You couldn't go out like that.
Right.
And he worked on me for like 20 minutes. And then he called a guy down. He says, Mike, I'm going to call this guy down. His name is Tom Jones. I said, okay. So Tom came down. Tom was probably around 6'3" at the time, 245. And he's a senior at prep. And I had no idea who he was. And he says, okay, Mike, what I want you to do what I just coached you against Tom, but you're going to go live. I said, live? What do you mean live? He said, well, like when you hit the sled as hard as you can. So Tom introduced me. He says, Mike, this is Tom. And so I got down there, and he blew the whistle, and I just fired off and hit Tom, and I drove him off the ball like at 2 or 3 yards. And he kind of pushed me a little bit. And he got a little frustrated, and I didn't understand. So I did it again. This time he starts grabbing me and pushing me, trying to punch me. And Tony says, no, it's okay, Tom. And so then he says, okay, try pass blocking. Do what I told you to do. So I pass blocked, and Tom came into me, and I went like that, and he fell down. And boy, he got up and he started wailing on me. And then Coach Zambrowski pulled us apart. And he said, Tom, go down the other field. And, then he turned to me. He said, do you know who Tom Jones is? I said, no, I don't. He said, Tom Jones is a Division I prospect. He's one of the toughest guys at prep. And he is a phenomenal football player. And you just handled him.
Yeah.
And it was at that point in time, I said, wow, I did, So that was a confidence builder. Now, the other part of the story that I tell is, if this scenario happened, he said, hey, Mike, I want you to go against Tom Jones. And he's running down. He said, you know who Tom Jones is? And this is the second side of the story. It didn't happen, but if it did happen, I think it would have changed my course of my career. He said, well, Tom Jones is a Division I player. He's the toughest guy at prep. He's going to get a full scholarship, and he's incredibly strong. And I have to go against him. You know what would have happened in my life as Tom is coming down?
Yeah.
There would have been some fear. I said, what? Am I going against this guy? And I wouldn't have done very well. But
right.
Tony, in his wisdom, did not do that. And that was kind of the start of that self-esteem building that I could play this sport called football. And it really wasn't, then I went out for wrestling, and that helped me tremendously, not only physically, but also strength-wise.
Sure.
And, having a one-on-one competition. I never wrestled before, other than my two older cousins, a year older than me, Jim and John Spraga, twins, and they used to attack me all the time. But, and Tommy. and that was just wrestling with your relatives. But this is real wrestling. So he taught me the ins and outs of wrestling. I wrestled my sophomore year, and I remember going against a guy. I think his name was Rich Andrews, and he was a junior at the time, and I had to pin him to win this particular match at Strong Vincent High School, and the place was packed, and the only opening was the net. And I had to pin him in one of the three periods in order to win this match. And Strong Vincent was undefeated at the time, and I think Prep had one loss, and I pinned him. And it was like mayhem. And that was my sophomore year. So those combinations of what Tony Zambrowski did for me in showing me the sport of football and instilling some self-confidence that you can play the sport, you just got to learn how to play it. And then going off of wrestling, I came back my junior year, I was a totally different football player.
Yeah, Mike, without going too deep into it, I've always said that basketball made me a better football player, and football made me a better basketball player. I would imagine the same is true not only for your basketball, but wrestling especially. The speed, the strength, the stamina, the balance that you need for wrestling may have made you a better football player as well. Is that a true statement?
Oh, yeah. I have a grandson who's a junior at Christ Episcopal School in Greenville. He's 6'3", 255, and he started wrestling a year and a half ago. And he's a state champ right now in South Carolina. And his at a heavyweight division, and that helped him with football. And he's getting a lot of looks right now as a junior. Several schools are talking because he's a small school. They don't know what kind of competition, but they know that he physically and wrestling really helped him. And there's no doubt that for me, wrestling, because I was not that good in basketball. I couldn't even dunk. I was 6'5", and I couldn't. I had a pretty big bottom, and I just couldn't get up over that rim very high and dunk that football. But boy, I was pretty good on defense.
Yeah. Yeah, going left to right is a lot easier than having to dunk and then Well, let's talk a little bit, and I know, Vincent, you got several questions, but tell me first, before we go into Vincent's portion, the recruiting process for you. Back in those days, I would imagine not the same, but Florida State was just getting started with Bobby Bowden, and Penn State was just getting started with Joe Paterno. The traditional school, maybe West Virginia for you, Pittsburgh, Notre Dame, of course, either the Michigan schools, State or Michigan and stuff. Who started looking at, and how did that process work for you?
Well, the process obviously was totally different back then. They don't have the sophistication they have today, as we understand. So it was pretty much Tony, my junior year. He and his wife, Marion, drove me out to the spring football game my junior year, the spring of my junior year. And that's when I met Eric Parsegan. It was a quote-unquote unofficial visit. And I guess they've been keeping an eye on me my sophomore year when I met Joe Kuharek at the time at a function at Holy Trinity Catholic School. And so I guess I was on their radar for a while, and I didn't even know it. It was just a big kid. We don't know what kind of potential, and going to be a seminary student and all that stuff. But so I went out there, met Era, and I saw the University of Notre Dame. And at the time, Harper, Notre Dame had maybe 5,000 undergrad and 2,000 grad students, and that was it. And it was all male, other than the grad students if you were married. And the campus was obviously beautiful, and Touchdown Jesus was there. No, he wasn't there my junior. They didn't build that until, it was there. Yeah, 60. Yeah, it was already there, Touchdown Jesus. So I had the chance to see Notre Dame, and then got into my senior year. I got letters from some people, and at the time, alumni could help recruit. So there was a gentleman in Erie, Ed Mead, who went to Syracuse. So I went up to Syracuse and met the coaches up there, and it was okay. And then I went out to Indiana University. I think Johnny Pont was the head coach. So I had a trip out there. And then my senior year, we're playing Butler, Pennsylvania. That should ring a bell familiar to everybody at Butler, Pennsylvania. And they're perennial state champs at the time, Butler High School. And my friend, who became my friend later on, is Mike Kelly, who's now the congressman from 33rd District of Butler. And he was in the stands when the shots were fired. And so him and Ron and Rich Saul and I and our dads, we went from that game, our senior year, to Penn State. And we drove out for the football game on Saturday. And I met Rep Engel was the head coach, and Joe Paterno was the assistant. And I looked at Penn State, and it was beautiful. It was in the mountains, but there was 40,000 students, and there were girls running around. I said, I don't know if it's a fit for me. And then I came back, and I signed with Notre Dame pretty quickly after my senior year. There was Mike Kelly. You guys are really very good. It's amazing what you can find. Yeah. So Mike Kelly and I played against each other in high school. And then he had a full scholarship to Notre Dame for football. And the Rich and Ron Saul brothers went to Michigan State. who ended up playing in the league for many, many years. They're tremendous. And unfortunately, Mike Kelly, his is George Kelly, but his dad is George Kelly, so he uses Mike for his it's George Michael Kelly. So George, or Mike, blew his knee out his freshman year, and he was done. So so they continued his scholarship, and we became friends. And he went back to Butler and took over the family business and was on the school board and doing all these sorts of things. And then when I think he was 62 years old, he ran for Congress, and there were 7 people on the Republican side and the incumbent Democrat on the other side. And he won the primary, and he ended up beating her. And pro-life guy and very conservative, phenomenal. And he's been tremendous for Western Pennsylvania, because his district was from Butler all the way north to Erie on that side of the state. And we talk and we text. Well, he's so busy right now. We text once in a while, but yeah, that's old Mike Kelly. So so my senior year, I signed with Notre Dame pretty quickly.
Well, the tradition there with the Irish, and you mentioned Ara Parseghian, he hadn't been there for very long at that time. This is
no,
66 or 7.
No, that was my freshman year was 66. So he was there in 65.
Okay.
I think he came in 64, 65. And then his first year, he almost won the national championship. We were playing Southern Cal, and we were beating them, and they called a penalty on. It was kind of interesting because this is on YouTube. And the back judge referee was in the back, and Tom Meeker was the offensive tackle on the other side. And you can see the referee going for his flag even before the game, before the ball was snapped, and he called him for holding. And we scored a touchdown, and then we had a chance. Didn't get a chance for a touchdown, I believe. We kicked the field goal, but they ended up so Southern Cal. That was been his first. That was an undefeated season for her. And that cost him the national championship.
Wow.
So he came back my freshman year, which was 66. That's when he won the national championship.
Well, the recruiting process, and Vincent, I'll leave it with you for now. We'll come back, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. But go ahead, Vincent.
Where you from? Erie, Pennsylvania. So many great football players that came out of there.
Oh, man.
Starting with Mr. Bolifikoff, who came from Florida State. Then you had other athletes: George Flint, Tom Lawless, Devon Johnson, Eric Hicks out of the University of Maryland, Nate Carr. But your high school, you set the tone for 2 very good football players that followed you. So I give you honor today. Bob Sanders, one of the best safeties out of the University of Iowa that played with the Indianapolis Colts. Yep. And then my man, I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan, Mr. McCoy, Mark Winowski, the son out of Pitt. So I give homage to you. So talk about you setting the tone and cathedral prep for these 2 young men to follow you.
Well, I don't know them very well. Again, that Sanders, he was MVP in the league one year as a defensive player. He was incredible. And, of course, Mark Stepnowski, what he did with Dallas Cowboys as a center. And there's a few other guys that came out of Erie at the time. And, I just think maybe if I was in their shoes and I was at prep and I say, hey, this guy, Mike McCoy, made it to the NFL, maybe I can too. So maybe you're right. And I had no idea if that was the inspiration for them or not. But I think sometimes when you're in a small town like Erie and you hear about Fred Bolitnikoff and you hear about myself and a couple of the other guys, I think it was Sir Fletcher Carr. I think he played in the league, or he could have been a wrestler, could have been an Olympic wrestler. But you see these other people, and that kind of says, that can maybe happen for me, and which is great. And because I think I was the first. I believe I was the first one out of prep ever to play in the NFL. We had a lot of guys go to college, but I was the first one who made it in the NFL. And of course, Fred Bolitnikoff was 4 years older than me, and 3 years older. He went 4 years old. And he went to Tech, and of course, I heard about his great career at Florida State, and then he got drafted by the Oakland Raiders, and which is kind of cool because when I went out there, Freddie was still there. And we had a nice time with the reunion. I think you could be right, Vincent, that maybe some of these guys say, "Hey, these guys played, and maybe I can do that too."
I make no mistake, but you was royalty. You set the tone for these gentlemen because of your legacy, and then you going on to Notre Dame. Back to you, Mr. LeBel.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. You signed with the Irish. And the way it was back then, Mike, you had to sit as a freshman. Was that all academics for you? You played on the freshman team. Would you have about 6 or 7 games with Notre Dame?
No, that was the first year they had freshman teams. So they hired a guy named Wally Moore, and he was a coach at St. Joe's High School, which was right off of campus at Notre Dame. And he was a perennial all-state champion. So he came in and he was fired up. and we had Wally Moore and a couple grad assistants. So when we drove from Erie out to Notre Dame, we got there, I think, around 11 o'clock. And I got my room at 222 Keenan, checked in there, got my books. And I think about 1 o'clock, 1:30, I went over to the stadium. And at the time, we didn't have, we were still dressing in the stadium because the Joyce Center was not built yet. My junior year, we moved in there. And so we went right from there to our first practice as a freshman team. And they put our names on the helmet: McCoy, Kelly, Nash, Lawson. Because once you got there, they kind of forgot your name for a while because you were just a freshman.
Yeah.
And we had a 2-hour practice with Wally Moore, and it was brutal. Then all of a sudden they said, "You 11 guys, go over there." I said, "Go over where?" And so I said, "That's where the varsity is," and they've been in training camp for 2 weeks. So now this is the week prior to the Purdue game. Tom Greasy. So we went over there and we got in this huddle. It was offense. So I was offensive right tackle. Mike Kelly was the guard. Mike Oriard, who ended up playing for the Kansas City Chiefs, was the center. And then we had Tom Nash as a fullback and Tom Lawson as a tight end. And Tom Nash was from Flushing, New York. And Tom was like 6'2", 240 pounds. There's Wally. And Tom was an incredible fullback. So we got in this huddle, and Coach Murphy holds up this card. He says, "We want you to run this play live against the defense." I said, and I'm looking over. I said, "What on defense?" He goes, "Yeah, we're going to run Purdue plays against them for, I don't know, 40 minutes, 45 minutes." I said, we're all kind of looking at each other. We just got done with an hour and 45-minute practice where Wally Moore, killed us. And so we break the huddle, and then that defense was amazing. There was a guy named Kevin Hardy, Alan Page, Pete Duranko, who ended up playing in the NFL. And someone asked me to describe Pete Duranko one time. I said, "Well, the only way I can describe Pete is like this oak tree with a hawk that's sitting on top of the oak tree." He looked like a hawk. And Pete was around 245, and he was a fullback out of Johnstown, PA. And Era put him at defensive tackle. Pete could literally walk on his hands everywhere he went.
Oh, wow.
I saw him at the gym go up a rope with his legs parallel to the floor, up and down. Unbelievable. And then we had Tom Rhodes. Then we had Jim Lynch, John Pergine. We had the Smith brothers, the SOS brothers. SOS was Smithberger, O'Leary, and Shane, defensive backs. And we had Mike McGill was another linebacker. Dave Martin was a linebacker. And I'm sorry, I met one guy. He became a doctor. So I can't remember his name. But so we broke the huddle, and out of that defense, there was probably most of them played in the NFL at some point in time. And then I had a trap, or I had a cutoff. I had to cut off Pete Duranko. So they came in and they had the slant defense at the time. So he slanted over the guard, and I'm looking right at his left hip. And so Mike Kelly had to pull and trap Alan Page. And we're going to give the ball to Tom Nash. First play. I didn't even touch Pete Duranko because he hit Tom Nash as soon as he got the ball and busted his helmet. That was my very first play at Notre Dame. And we had a scrimmage in the rest of the time. And I came in with a couple stitches underneath my eye. And so I got on that payphone, at Keenan Hall. And some of you don't know what a payphone is. So I put my little quarter in there and I called collect, the guy named Tony Zambrowski. I said, "Coach Zambrowski, what have you got me into here?" Because the next day I had to get up at 7 o'clock and we had classes till 2 and we're back out in the field. And he said, "Well, just hang in there. It's going to be an adjustment. Don't give up." I said, "I'm not going to give up." And I said, "My God," I said, "this is a level that I'm not even used to." And after a while, after about a couple of weeks, you got used to that. You adjusted and made the adjustments, and we kind of held our own against them when we scrimmaged them again. But our freshman team only had 2 games. One was against Pitt, and one was against Michigan State. And the Pitt game was kind of interesting because the guy that I competed against, his name was Tony Truitt from Erie, and he was at prep his sophomore year or freshman year when I was at the seminary. And we had a GV coach that was crazy. So 4 guys just left, went to East High School, and Tony was one of them. And Tony was like 6'3", 240, very good athlete. And I had to compete against him the whole time I was at prep. And so we're playing against Pitt, and we were beating them really bad. And so Era was the coach. So he let the clock run. And then we ended up playing Michigan State before that famous 10-10 tie. We can talk about that a little bit later on. But the freshman team was very, very interesting. And then we had the Toilet Bowl on Monday. And the Toilet Bowl was for all the other varsity players who did not play in the game would scrimmage on Monday, the freshman team. And that was brutal. 2.5 hour scrimmage. All these guys want to move up in the depth chart. They want to prove that they're good. And that was probably the most brutal thing I went through at Notre Dame was those toilet bowls my freshman year. Thank God when I was a sophomore, I didn't have to do that because I was a starter.
Yeah.
But that was brutal. That was brutal every Monday afternoon because the varsity left and we were there playing the toilet bowl.
You had to play against the guys that were hungry enough, and then they wanted to beat somebody up, one of those quote unquote rookies back in the day. And that's just the way life was, right? As a freshman, how big was the class? Do you remember? Were there 20 guys, 25?
My freshman class, it had to be at least 20. Yeah, because I think the scholarships were over 100 at that time. So maybe we had 20, 25 guys. A couple of them. One guy came from Chicago, and he had a great reputation. Unfortunately, he left. I don't know why. And then we had another guy from Wyoming who was a very good linebacker, and he left after his freshman year. So we lost a couple guys. But most of the guys hung in there and stayed. Yeah.
Well, what was it like, even though you weren't technically playing, you were on the team, listening to the band go through the tunnel the first time or, hitting Play Like a Champion Today? Was that sign up there at that time?
No, it wasn't.
No.
That sign was not there. The sign we had there was, but the odds be great or small, Notre Dame men will win overall. That sign was there for 35, 40, 50 years before Play Like a Champion.
Yeah. Well, I've asked SC alumni, what was it like for you listening? He goes, man, I got chills down my spine just being a part of that. Between the recruiting process, your freshman year, it changes, now it's work. And by the time you're a senior, when you get a chance to really, gosh, this was amazing for me, when a lot of guys say that, we'll go into that Michigan State game, but your first few weeks on campus, you're ready to go home. This is, well, maybe not necessarily go home, but what did I do?
Crossed my mind, Harper.
Well, yeah, and a collect call, right? I don't know what to do, but you were able to gather it up, and obviously the coaches saw something in you. And was weight training a first for you there at Notre Dame?
What is weight training?
Well, that means you're supposed to lift weights.
Oh, lift weights. No, you got to remember the culture we lived in back then. And the coaches, they just didn't know a lot about training the body, nutrition, and all these different things that these young men go to now. And I 2 years ago, I was speaking at a Catholic school in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and I met this young man. He was 6'7", 320 pounds, and he was a sophomore in high school. And now he's at Notre Dame. I mean, kid is mammoth, And so what was happening out in California at the time? Do you remember that, Harper?
In '66?
Yeah, no, in the 60s on Venice Beach.
Oh, well, Arnold wasn't there yet, but Muscle Beach was just starting to begin. Sergio Olivier was one of the first guys that I remember, old school, that kind of changed the weightlifting, and all the others said, hey, I want to look like this guy.
Yeah. And the coaches saw that, and they walked around. They didn't seem to be very, very loose. And we had no idea they're shooting up anabolic steroids at the time.
Well,
weightlifting was not there. But I do remember when I was in high school, I had an isometric apparatus that I bought. I just saw it. I don't know. I saw an advertisement. And then I also saw Charles Atlas' book. And Charles Atlas was a big weightlifter, but he was a bodybuilder and a weightlifter, but I think he was pretty clean. And so I bought his book, and I did some of those exercises on my own in high school. Yeah. Especially the isometric thing was kind of interesting. You pull on a cord, 10 seconds, and you let it go through for 10 or 15 seconds. And I actually had some weights up in my upstairs where I live with my grandparents. But as far as coming from an organization or coming from Coach Parsegan, no, we had a Father Lang's gym on campus, and I was right behind the dome. And Father Lang was from Sweden. He was a big old guy, very strong. And, he didn't want us to go over there. And we snuck over there once in a while. And we had a guy named Mike Bergner, who was a big weightlifter. And Mike was a great athlete, but he always seemed to have a pulled muscle. So Aaron would always say, look at Bergner. He always has a pulled muscle, It had nothing to do with anything. That was the mentality at the time. Yeah, but we had him, and that was it. So we did a lot of push-ups, sit-ups, run up and down those stadium stairs, and a lot of running. And so weight training really wasn't there at all when I was in college.
Well, and they wanted you to be as big as Mike. You didn't have a small waist, like a 32-inch waist, like Michael Strahan, let's say, or Tuck, or the guys. You were a big guy.
How do you know what my waist was?
Well, I'm just assuming you were a big boy and you're a thick Polish background. You said you ate a lot. So I'm going to assume that's what I'm going to do. And you know what? It worked out just fine for you. You know what? I'm hard to move. I'm big, strong. I'm a former wrestler. I can do some things. I'm athletic, and, catch me if you can. But you get to Notre Dame and you play tackle. When did they move you? Was it during your freshman year that they moved you to the defensive side?
Yeah, well, you went both ways. But when we did the scrimmage, I went both. I was on offense when we scrimmaged against varsity, and then when we played against the other teams, I was a defensive tackle. Yeah.
Okay.
Right away. Yep.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, your sophomore year starts with you getting your uniform and you're on the field. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Coach Joe Yonta was our defensive line coach, and he was also from St. Joe's High School, and he was part of the tradition of St. Joe's. So he came over, and Joe was Joe. Let me put it this way: Joe was challenged height wise, so we had to kneel down so he could talk to us and face to face, and he always had a cigar. And Johnny Ray was the defensive coordinator, and he was tremendous, and we had a great. George Sefsek, and it's amazing you still remember some of these names after 55 years. And so we had really great coaching at the time, and we had the slant defense and learning that, which I thought was a very interesting defense. And I do remember the Dallas Cowboys used to have the one guy up, one guy back, four-man line. That was pretty interesting too.
Flex, that's what they call it. And Landry called it a flex.
Flex, yeah.
Yeah.
So my sophomore year, you go through training camp, you work hard, and I was an asphalt shoveler during the summertime. John McCormick Construction Company. John was a graduate of Notre Dame. So I had a chance to shovel asphalt in the summertime and 400 degrees of this asphalt. And so when I came to training camp, heat didn't even bother me. So I had a pretty good training camp. And then we opened up against California. And that was my opening game my sophomore year at Notre Dame. And that was incredible, coming out of that tunnel as a Notre Dame football player and going through that tunnel, then hitting the sign, with the odds be great or small, and then coming out to the band. And, it's an amazing, it's hard to describe the feeling you have because the stadium was packed and people were, and I was pretty nervous. And Coach Shiano, I remember Coach Johnny Ray came up to me and he just, kind of ruffled my hair. He says, "Hey, take it easy. You'll do fine. You'll be okay. You got a lot of people around you," and that was the start of it.
Wow, you're go ahead, yeah, Vincent, go.
Your sophomore year in '67, correct? Somebody wanted me to ask you a question today. Some of my friends, who was the better running back when you started as a sophomore? The young man out of Galileo, USC, O.J. Simpson, or either Leroy Keys out of Purdue? Tell the truth, Mr. McCoy, who was better?
That's a tough one because I played against both of them my sophomore year, and we lost to USC and we lost to Purdue. Leroy Keys, I would describe, if I can remember correctly, Leroy Keys was, he was a tough runner and very quick, where O.J. Simpson he was just a runner where he got that daylight, he was gone. So you couldn't run around blocks. You had to keep your pads parallel, and which we did my junior year. We played against USC, and he just won the Heisman. It was our last year. And we actually stayed at the Ambassador Hotel where Robert Kennedy was killed, and that was about 1968. And so we devised a 4-4 defense. It was a read defense against USC at the time, and we ended up 52 yards and 32 carries, and because he had nowhere to go, because he was always going cutting back, or he's heading to the outside. So we just kind of stayed and kept our shoulders parallel. Leroy Keys, he was more of a power runner, where OJ was more of a runner who was very smooth. He looked like he wasn't running very fast, but he was quick, very quick. And once he was
a big dude too, wasn't he? But OJ was
Leroy Keys wasn't small either. Yeah, OJ was bigger than people think. I don't know exactly what his size was at the time, but yeah, there he is. And I think that's my cleat there on the left, trying to get him. I'm not sure.
It looks like it's facing the other way too. It's OJ's this way, and you're pointing that way. Well, you mentioned the Purdue and the SC game. You beat Cal. What is it, 41-8? I'm looking at the schedule here, Mike.
Oh, okay.
And then you've got at Purdue.
Yeah.
So your first road game of the year, and it's 28-21 there in Lafayette. That's
Yep.
Talk a little bit about, a number 10 team in the country, right? Purdue was pretty good back then. Was that you mentioned Greasy? Len Dawson was also from Purdue. He'd already been there. Is that correct?
Yeah, and Greasy was gone too, because my freshman year was the year that Greasy was a senior at Purdue.
Okay,
that was the national championship year for Notre Dame. So it was Mike Phipps was a quarterback. Yeah, it was Mike Phipps. So they had a pretty good team. Yeah. I hate to say this, but that's one of my stains on my career at Notre Dame is that we lost to Purdue every year, my sophomore, junior, senior year. Yeah, I still have nightmares about that. Yeah, and then we had a chance to beat them at Notre Dame at home my senior year. One of my friends dropped a 2-point pass, and we would have beat Purdue that year. And that year, my senior year, we went 9-1-1. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So we would have been 10-0-1 going into that Texas game, Vince. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, you get Iowa after
that year. So you're coming out. I guess what you're saying, Harper. My sophomore year, first 2 games were 1-1. We just won a national championship, and that looked like it was not going to happen my sophomore year.
Yeah, and then you beat Iowa, and then you've got SC. They're ranked number 1 in the country there. You get them at home, and you lose 24-7 in that one. So you get you're 2-2 really.
2-2. Yeah. Not fun. Not fun at all. Then I think we won the rest of the games.
You did. Illinois, Michigan State, Navy, at Pitt, at Georgia Tech, and then at Miami last game of the year. So you pulled it out nicely. 8-2 isn't a bad record, except if you had won the national championship the year before. 8-2 is it's an year, right?
For Notre Dame, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That Miami game was very hot. It was in December, and Ted Hendricks was a senior, I think, or junior at the time. We played against Miami. And after that game, we had like 10, 15 guys with IVs. We sweated so much in that game because we just came from South Bend. It's chilly. There's snow on the ground, and you go down to Florida. It's oh my gosh, And so it's like holy mackerel. It was like playing in an oven.
Well, Mike, I've said this for years. If they took the Rose Bowl and they switched it every other year, where one year you go out to California, it's nice and warm, it's sunny, a little cool for the locals, but at least there's no snow on the ground, and then the Western teams would have to go east, and if they played at the Horseshoe or at your stadium, if they played it at the Big House, the Big Ten would win every time in the cold weather. The LA the West Coast teams, they couldn't handle the cold.
I believe so, absolutely. It's like when Miami comes up to Notre Dame in the cold. It's a different team.
Yeah. Good luck with that one. All right, 68. Let's talk about it. You mentioned earlier you're in the Ambassador Hotel. To me, Mike, 1968 was one of the most tumultuous years in U.S. history. Lots of stuff going on. The war is kicking in. There's racial issues all over the place. And more importantly than all that, and please forgive me, I'm not trying to say those aren't important issues, political, everything. You have family issues where the young girl, the daughter, who's got long hair and flowers and tie-dye shirt, and her dad is still wearing a black tie with a white shirt, black belt, black slacks, white socks, and a black pair of shoes.
And a crew cut.
Exactly. Black horn rim glasses. There's nothing wrong with that, but there was a clash between families, mothers and daughters, fathers and sons, and then all this other stuff. And then you get to play in one of the games of the century. All of that kicking in. What amazing year 1968 was.
Yeah, but you got to go back a little bit further when I was a sophomore in high school. The 60s were very tumultuous in the United States. You had Kennedy being killed, all right? Then you had Martin Luther King, and you had the riots. Then you had Bobby Kennedy getting killed. And you had the Vietnam War escalating because LBJ sent all our troops over there. And then you had Kent State. And a good friend of mine now is named Gary Renaud. He played for McDowell, and we graduated at the same time. That was a big rival in our town. And he was at Kent State, and he was a football player at Kent State, and he was there when those students were shot.
Yeah.
And so, wow, it was tough.
Well,
But Hesper,
Nick Saban was on campus. He and a buddy of his had just eaten lunch, and the buddy says, "Hey, let's go left." And for whatever reason, and then the shooting took place not too soon after that to the right. So it was very interesting how, from a cultural perspective, how crazy things were back then.
Yeah, well, when we were at the Ambassador Hotel, we were sitting in the area where Bobby Kennedy was giving his speech. So I got to talking with some of the waiter guys, and I said, "Hey, do you think we can go back there and look at that area where Bobby Kennedy was killed?" And he was, sure. So we went back, and I'm going to tell you, it was so small because when you look at that picture, you got Bobby on the floor, you got all these people, but the area was not. It was just an alleyway, and I don't know how. And then who else was in there? Oh, the big defensive tackle from the Rams, Rosie Grimm was back there. Yeah. But it was also interesting later on when you saw some documentaries about that evening, and you're looking at Bobby Kennedy. So we're in the audience, and Bobby Kennedy's behind the podium, and you're looking at Bobby Kennedy, and he's doing a speech, and Bobby Kennedy wanted to go to the right, and his manager pulled him to the left, and that's where Saran was. Bobby wanted to exit to the right, and he went to the left, and he pulled him over there.
Yeah, he says on to Chicago, a thumbs up, and he does a little flip of his hair. He used to always do that. And then he just turned a little bit to the right, is what you're saying. And then he was told to go to the left.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. I know. Yeah.
Well, again, you don't experience that if you're not out there playing USC later on in the year, right? Mm-hmm. But you open up against Oklahoma, then Purdue's #1 in the country. How about that? Pretty good season for you guys.
Yeah. We stopped Steve Owens. He got like maybe 60 yards against us, then he gets 100 yards per game after that. And so we beat Oklahoma and we lose to Purdue again. And that was my senior year. I think you're talking about 69 or 68. I'm not sure.
This is 68, Mike.
68, we played Oklahoma in my junior year. Okay.
Yeah. And then Iowa, Northwestern, Illinois, Michigan State again. This time you play them at Michigan State, right? Yeah. This isn't the game, but it's Navy, Pitt, Georgia Tech, and then you finish at USC with a 21-21 tie.
21-21, I know. Yeah, that was the year we stopped OJ. So they had a pass. And yeah, that was I have nightmares about that one too. That one in the Texas game that we'll talk about.
Okay. So there's 3 nights.
You want to talk about that 10-10 tie? Is that you're still want to talk about that 10-10 tie?
I'd love to talk about
Duffy Doherty was going to go for the tie.
Are you ready? Are you ready to talk about that now? Let's do it. Because you told me.
Because I wasn't in that game, unfortunately, as you know. But we went up on the train with the varsity, and we're playing Michigan State at a high school stadium on that Friday night. 15,000 people. It was packed. And we beat them in a last-second field goal, Michigan State, that night. So the next day, we're on the sideline. But one of the things a lot of people know is happening behind the scenes, because a lot of people blame Eric for this tie. And he actually went for the win. And so when Nick Eddy was getting off the train, he separated his shoulder again. He had a bad shoulder and he hurt it. He couldn't play. So here you have your All-American halfback, Nick Eddy. Can't play in the game. You got Terry Hanratty, that's the quarterback. And, he's a what is he? He's a freshman. No.
Sophomore.
He's a sophomore. You're right. And and they just beat we beat Purdue, and him and the wide receiver are on the cover of Time magazine.
Jim Seymour,
thank you. Who's unfortunately passed away. And so now we're going up there. It's the game of the century, and it's I believe it's the first one that's broadcast live across the nation. And everyone has these little black and white TV things. So many people are watching that game. So we lose him. Then you got Bubba Smith. You got so many phenomenal football players on the other side of the line. Our offensive center was George Gedeke. He gets hurt in the first quarter. And so in comes Monty. And Monty was maybe 230, and he's playing against Bubba Smith. And we lose everything up in the middle. We lost. I'm not saying any excuses why the 10-10 tie, but I think you have to understand the contents of this. So we lost Nick Eddy. We lose our we lost 2 All-Americans right away. And so now Bubba comes in and slams Terry onto the ground. Second quarter, maybe separates his shoulder. So in comes Coley O'Brien. Coley's a great football player, but he was not doing very well physically. And we're watching this game, and the hitting was phenomenal. And back and forth. Yeah, that's amazing. And Coley was having a diabetic attack, and he didn't know he was a diabetic. So one of the doctors saying, Coley, give me the symptoms. So they had to give him candy bars on the sideline. So he couldn't even pass over 20 yards. And then we came in as a halfback, so the game got tied 10-10. We go for a field goal, and Azzaro misses the field goal. And now Duffy has a chance to get the ball back, and he sits on it. I think he sits on it, and that's how he ended up 10-10.
Question.
Well, I'm counting 4 guys on offense, Mike. And Vincent, we'll get your question. Go right ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. During the 10-10 tie, Notre Dame, how did y'all feel about what was coming down from South, the University of Alabama, saying they undefeated and they should have ended up winning the national championship? I just want to get your opinion.
Well, who did they play?
Good question.
Thank you. Yeah, it was the MacArthur Bowl. So the coaches, actually, it was kind of interesting. I love what's happening in college football today with the playoff. I think that gets rid of all this other stuff. But the coaches voted for because Notre Dame went out and beat SC like 52-1 or whatever it was. And Alabama, were they undefeated that year?
Yes, sir. They ended up winning the Sugar Bowl against Nebraska, but they feel like they got robbed.
Yeah, well, they should, but they didn't. So we won. So let it go, guys.
Back to you, Hop.
Well,
we were undefeated too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would Alabama done if they played against Michigan State?
We'll never know, Mike. You're never going to know.
We'll never know.
Yeah.
I just throw that out there. Stir the pot.
Now, when you told me about this, I'm thinking, wait a second, you have 4 of your starters not even a starter, but 4 of your best players on offense, both your quarterbacks. One is having a diabetic reaction. The other one's hurt. You lose your running back, your starting center against Bubba Smith. You're lucky you didn't get blown out of the house, but that tells me how good the team was other than that, right?
Our defense was phenomenal that year. Yeah, it's probably one of the best defenses in college football in a long time. Yeah, our defense kept us in the game. Absolutely. Because Michigan State's offense, my goodness, they had I think Webster was on defense. But who you guys got all the answers to this because you got the information.
And Jimmy Ray at quarterback.
That's right.
Clint Jones was the All-American halfback. That's right. And Gene Washington was the All-American.
Gene Washington, yeah. So we, they only scored 10 points against us. Yeah, so that our Notre Dame defense was pretty good. Yeah. Yeah, that was an incredible experience being on the sideline for that game. Yeah.
And I have to ask, Mike, the pressure's off. You're in street clothes or you're just wearing sweatsuits or whatever it is that the Irish had you there. But I would imagine that atmosphere, how amped, do you get as a potential player knowing that this is lying ahead of you in terms of just great places to play, tough crowd. They're all against you except for the 50 Irish fans that made the trip. Just getting you ready for what your football career was going to turn into.
Yeah, that was, you kind of look at it and say, okay, here you go. You're coming in your sophomore year and we just won a national championship and we're ranked and, what do we come out 1-1? So that was pretty disappointing. So because it was a brand new football team my sophomore year. And, Joe Theismann was just coming on the scene as a freshman. Terry Henry was a junior at the time. And just the expectations were tremendous. So for us to, I think, finish the year that we did at 8-2 that year was pretty good in the sense of where we were as a football team, because it was not the team of 1966. The whole defense was revamped, and offensively was revamped.
Was he Joe Theismann back then when he was a freshman, Mike?
Yeah, Joe was a freshman. Yeah, in New Jersey. Yeah,
but it was still Theismann though. It wasn't Theismann until
no, it's still Joe Theismann. Yeah,
that's right.
And he was like 5'8", 155 pounds. And I said, who is this cocky kid? Yeah.
I read an interesting story about him, Jim Plunkett, Ken Anderson, Dan Pastorini that Sports Illustrated did, and some of the others that were draft picks from that year, the quarterback club, if you will, from that draft. That was 71,
Right.
and where they were. How did you find out? Were you on campus? Did somebody have to come find you to get you to say, hey, there's a phone call for you, and it's from the Green Bay Packers?
Oh, you're talking about my senior year? Yeah. Again, there was no New York, there was no ESPN, no nothing.
You didn't have to do a big hug with the commissioner back then, with Pete Rozelle?
Yeah. No, I was actually in class at the time, and I was heading off to law school because the leagues merged. I think my junior year they merged, and so now the money was nothing, compared to what it was when Joe Namath was there and Nick Eddy, and they got all these big bonuses because they had competition between the old AFL and the NFL.
Yeah.
So they merged, and I think I was a second class after the merger, so there was nothing there. And so I figured I'm going to go to law school, and so I came back and I had a message to call some guy named Pat Pepler. I had no idea who he was, never talked to the guy before, and he was a personnel director from Green Bay. And I didn't even know, we weren't even watching the draft back then. I mean, there's some. If you see the picture they put on USA Today, it's Pete Rozelle or it's the guy from Pittsburgh who's the owner, Art Rooney. They have a chalkboard. They have a chalkboard with different names on it.
Right.
And that's how they did it back then. So I get this call, and Pat Pepler says, "Hey, Mike, congratulations." I said, well, "For what, Mr. Pepler?" So we just drafted you. I said, "Oh, okay. I appreciate that." And I hung up the phone. I mean, I had no clue. And so I figured, wow, I went in the first round, and there was some other guy named Terry Bradshaw ahead of me. And so I was still at Notre Dame, and we didn't even talk contracts back then, and because there was nothing to talk about. I mean, you take what they wanted, or you go to Canada, and not too many guys are going to Canada. I think Stillwagon from Ohio State went to Canada, and obviously Joe went to Canada. That was about your only option at the time, and I wasn't even thinking about that. So I remember going up to Green Bay in I think it was April, and I'm still at school getting ready for finals and my senior year, and I signed this big contract for $18,000.
Wow.
I got a bonus, but back then taxes were like 70%. If you before Ronald Reagan came along, and bonus went out the window, pretty quick. So when I then I ended up getting married on July 4th. That was the only Saturday I had available at the time, and my poor late wife Kia, I said, it's either July 4th or so we'll take July 4th. So we got married July 4th, and I go off to the All-Star game in Chicago, and then she came up with her mother, and we found this little apartment for, I don't know, $80, whatever it was. And we started my career in our marriage life with that.
Wow.
And I came back to Erie, and we found an apartment for $75, no heat in Erie. Just had this old crate, and it was furnished. And I went to night school, grad school, and then I worked at a bank. And I worked out like at 5 o'clock when I could. And that was my off season, my first year.
Well, everybody back then, by the end of your career, Mike, it was starting to change a little bit, but didn't everybody have, well, I better get started with my own life's work? And those are Chuck Knox's words.
Yeah.
$18,000 was nice, but it certainly wasn't, a heck of a lot of money compared to what other people were making. And
I did a calculation one time. I have a degree in economics, but don't be impressed with that guy. I still can't balance my checkbook or understand all this stuff that's going on. But I did a calculation. I said, what is $18,000 worth in today's dollars? It was like $90,000 in today's dollars.
Yeah. Comfortable, but certainly, you've got that free time. And would you take an economics type job during the off season? Were it offered to you, or is it just something?
Yeah, I worked at a bank. Yeah.
Yeah.
During my off season. Yeah, I worked at a bank, and they put me in the back room, and I'm sitting there with a little calculator, and I was a car chaser. I had to chase people down who didn't pay their car loans.
Okay.
And it was my job. And I said, oh my God, I must got run over like 4 times.
You're the guy right before the repo guy. You're the guy that tells the repo guy.
Yeah. It's not fun.
And part of the issue of for the folks that are listening here, we go, the old days, whatever. It's hard to get a job because you're only going to be doing it for a few months before you had to go back to training camp.
Exactly. Yeah, you couldn't really. Yeah, exactly.
You're not there for. It's not.
Yeah, I ended up. My late wife Kia her family's from Wisconsin, and one of her uncles was John Spalding, and he had a school supply company. So I ended up working for him. One off season, I made more money selling school supplies than I did playing football.
Wow.
Yeah.
Pencils, erasers, and scratch
equipment, furniture, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, your first year is in Green Bay. Was Dan Devine there at that time?
No, my rookie year, Vince Lombardi died September 6, 1970. That's my birthday. And he was already in Washington. We had a coach named Phil Bankston was the head coach because he was a defensive coordinator in Lombardi. So Vince was gone, I think, in 68. And so he was already gone. And he had my late wife's uncle was a priest, Father Bill Spalding, and he was Vince's confessor. And he used to tell me that Vince used to take Tums and just eat Tums because they thought he had acid, but he had colon cancer. They had no clue back then.
Yeah, right.
And so he died. And of course, I come into the Packers, Bart Starr's still there, Carroll Dale, Forrest Gregg, Dave Robinson, Ray Nitschke was still there, Willie Wood, all these great players from the past, but they're kind of getting towards the end of their career. And so where there was a turnover, so they fired Vince, and then 1971 is when they hired Dan Devine, and he drafted Willie Buchanan and John Brockington, and we had Scott Hunter was our quarterback, and Scott broke all Kenny Stabler's records at Alabama, and he came in, and Scott was left-hander, and he was tough, and he was a leader, and couldn't understand a lot of things he said. He had that southern draw, and we had to say, what did you just say?
Yeah.
Not as bad as Bobby Hebert. If you ever heard Bobby Hebert speak,
oh yeah,
oh my gosh, Bobby Hebert.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. What did you say, Bobby? But we ended up winning a title in '72. We were 10-2. And a lot of 10-4. A lot of sports writers at the time said we're a better team than the '60s, and we went and we lost to Washington, and Bart Starr was the quarterback coach. So we go and play Washington first playoff game, and we lose 16-7 because we didn't throw the football until the fourth quarter. And Bart walked away, and he quit after that, and then things went downhill after that.
Yeah, that team ends up losing to Washington, who goes to the Super Bowl and has to face the Miami Dolphins. Correct, Mike?
Yeah.
That's
We would have played against the Dolphins.
Yeah.
I have no idea who that guy is.
Well, you don't have the stash yet, so that's we'll get to that in a little bit. Yeah. All right, Jim Carter, Ken Ellis, Irvin Hunt, Cleo Walker, Frank Patrick, Mike Carter, Larry Krause from St. Norbert. Oddly enough, that's where the
17th round made the team.
Al Matthews and the Packers had 2 first-rounders that year. A guy named Rich McGeorge, a tight end from Elon, and you. Yep. Pretty good group of guys there, right? You got 2 guys that end up going into the Pro Bowl, but on a team that Paul Hornung, you mentioned him, right? Some of the others, and from a defensive perspective, Ray Nitschke, some of the other great players. Was it a pinch you? Vince was gone, and literally Vince had died by that time. Is that correct?
Yeah, September 6, 1970.
Yeah. So you go to training camp in Green Bay, and it's like, and there's not a whole heck of a lot going on. I mean, you stay at St. Norbert's, but the practice facility is right near the stadium. Talk about the small town. I mean, South Bend isn't a big town, but compared to Green Bay,
yeah. It was great. I loved it. As a matter of fact, we ended up staying in Green Bay for 9 years, and because not only that my late wife's family was from that area, but I love Green Bay. We lived out in the country a little bit. And the people were tremendous, and if you lost, it was kind of tough. But it was a very, very interesting time. And then we did win. The first couple of years I was there, and then we also almost won again. And I think in 1994 we were almost winning again. And then finally they fired Dan Devine, and I don't know why Notre Dame hired him, but they did. And then he ended up winning a national championship. So who knows? And so then Bart took over, and then I was with Bart for a year. We had no draft choices. So he ends up trading me to the Raiders, and for number 1 and number 4 in a player. And if you know anything, guys, Harper, I went from purgatory to heaven. It was that dramatic of a switch, going from a team where Dan Devine was head coach to a team where John Madden was the head coach. Yeah. But I left a lot of good friends. Bart Starr and Carroll Dale were, really very influential in my life. You have certain people. I got to take a little drink here.
Sure, please do. Yeah.
It's iced tea, not a drink. And of course, Tony Zambrowski was pivotal. You have these mentors that come into your life. And then Bart Starr and Carol Dale were two people that I looked up to, and Carol Dale really was a phenomenal guy. And he got me to go to the Chapel program in the NFL. And through the Chapel program, that changed the path of my life also. So
Okay.
I had a lot of great things that happened up there at the time.
Yeah. Well, a small town, as you mentioned, where everybody knows you, and you probably know everybody, or at least most of the folks that are there. And even though it was, I'll call it a drier period, obviously, the 2 Super Bowl championships that they had and the NFL championships during the mid-'60s, right? When you were at Notre Dame, Green Bay and Cleveland were really the 2 teams in the NFL that they were the places to be.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, my 66 was the year they won the first. They didn't call it a Super Bowl back then, but that's the year they beat. Excuse me, and they beat Kansas City.
And then the Raiders were in the second.
Raiders. Yeah. I'm not sure Vince, when did they start calling it a Super Bowl? In 68, 69?
Yes, sir. But question, if I can ask.
Yeah.
I read something last night that you mentioned Mr. Barkstar and Carol Dale, and y'all started the NFL Chapel program. And something that touched my heart, that's when you accepted grace. And one thing I learned from the articles that your favorite book in the Bible is the book of Proverbs.
Yes.
So I leave it at that. Back to you, Hoff. That's my favorite book, Proverbs.
Yeah.
And I thought that was real inspirational, and that's nice.
Yeah. I believed in God and I believe in Jesus Christ. And I went through that period, I think, where everybody questions that. And then I looked at the evidence. I said, okay, but in my life, it wasn't real. And through the Chapel program in the NFL, listening to these former players and these former business people come in. So I went to Mass on Saturday night because I had a duty and obligation to fulfill. Plus, we were playing the Bears the next day. So I decided to go to Chapel. And that's where I finally understood that I couldn't buy or deserve God's love, that it was unconditional. And that's when I understood about the personal relationship with Jesus Christ through that influence. And I heard about it growing up, but for that point in time, when I heard it from these men, I said, this makes sense to me. And I, like you said, I opened up my heart to grace.
Back to you, Hop. His journey with the Raiders.
Well, before we do that, so the influence that a guy like Bart Starr would have, and the award that Athletes in Action has given every year to at least one player is the Bart Starr Award.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Bart's faith is a tremendous part of his life, and basically just a real simple look. I'm not going to force it down your throat, but it was a difference for me. Yeah. And then he's able to share that with some of the other guys that have questions. I remember Reggie White, when I played with Reggie, people said to Reggie, they go, how can you play professional football and call yourself a believer? Aren't those two opposites of one another? And he goes, well, football is an aggressive sport. I aggressively play that, but I also have an aggressive attitude towards my faith. I aggressively pursue everything that Jesus stood for, and I believe in it in a way that I express it to others with a tremendous amount of confidence, because I believe it to be real and it sustains me. So, Mike, that's a magic moment for anybody in their life, and it happened to you while you were playing.
Yeah, Reggie is a minister of defense.
Yeah.
Then that organization, as you know, Harper, Pro Athletes Outreach, called PAO.
Yep.
That's still in existence today. It's been around 53 years, and it's a conference ministry to professional athletes and their wives to learn how to live their life according to godly principles. It doesn't have to do anything with religion. It has to do with relationships. And that organization, Steve Stenstrom heads it up now, and it's still very, very powerful. And a lot of people don't know about it because they don't go out there to publicize PAO. But if you want to read about it, it's PAO.org. There's a lot of players that are involved with that.
Yeah, Jeff Kemp was in charge of it, or at least for a little while. And I was a teammate with Jeff. And they used to call it the God Squad, right? The Seattle Seahawks when we first started, with Zorn and obviously with Steve Largent and some of the other players that were there. And you know what? It was almost the only uncomfortable guys were the ones that wanted to be the Hellraisers like the Raiders. I don't know if there's a high percentage of believers on those.
Well, when I worked there, there was Monty Johnson. Who was a tremendous inside linebacker from Nebraska. Dave Rowe was there.
Okay.
Rich Bueller was there. And a couple other guys, but that was it. And so I went there, and they didn't have a chapel program. And I'm thinking, well, that's kind of interesting. And so I said, I'll go ask Al, why not? So I asked Coach Davis, I loved Al Davis, and very easy to talk to. And I said, Al, and you called him Al. And I said, Al, I said, what about Chapel? He goes, well, he said, I'm a God guy. Don't get me wrong. I said, okay. And he says, well, I don't want anybody from the outside coming in, because he was a very, very, a lot of athletes are very superstitious. So there's a I guess it's a physiological thing that you do things the same way every week. And so he didn't want any outside influences. So I just said, how about if we do it? He goes, what do you mean? And we'll do it, from the inside. Sure. So we had Chapel. And he ended up actually hiring a guy full time later on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've had Ken Harrock on. Was Ken there when was he?
No, he was not. I've got to know Ken in the last couple of years, because I'm going to tell you, I played 2 years for the Raiders. I go out there all the time, and it's amazing. Once a Raider, always a Raider.
Yes.
I love Green Bay. I love Green Bay Packers. I think in the last 55 years, I've been up there maybe 5 times. But in Oakland, I go out 2 or 3 times a year. And I started because Ken is from Atlanta. So we actually have a luncheon you got to come to every third Wednesday.
Right.
Yeah, pretty cool. So I got to know Ken, but he was not there when he was there.
Yeah, but Ken and Ron Wolf and Ken replaced John Madden as the linebacker coach when John Madden, the linebacker coach, became the head coach. And Ken said when we interviewed him a couple months ago, Vincent, if you remember that, and here's why I bring this up, is he still calls him Mr. Davis.
Yeah.
Now you call him Al, and I don't have a problem with either or. It's just there's a certain amount of respect that Ken will always have for that gentleman and what he did for him and what he did for the league. Now, Pete Rozelle might not have the same opinion, but you mentioned something that's very important, at least in my life, being a part of an organization that treats their own not like heroes or anything like that, but they remember the history, and the Raiders have been that because they've been champions. That's a very unique experience, different from the way that Green Bay does it.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Question.
Yeah.
You being this great guy, this everything about you is class. And then you go out to Oakland, and then I'm looking at the roster, and you beside Otis Sistrunk, the man from Mars.
Yeah.
Jack Tatum, the assassin. Cliff Branch, Speed Man. The Snake Stabler. My man, Art Shell, Henry Lawrence, Willie Brown, Skip Thomas. And back then, the Raiders played very physical football, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. And how about the twos? John Matuzak.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
And then Dave Browning.
How about Neil Colsey? How nice was it to have a guy like Neil Colsey behind you, Mike?
Yeah.
I mean, what is that? And then you got the Stork still out there, Ted Henry.
Stork, I played with Stork 1 year in Green Bay, and then he left and went to Oakland. 2 years later, I'm out there.
But I'm trying to figure out, what was it like playing on that defense? The words, the hidden. I read somewhere that defense in the 70s, y'all had offensive people running from y'all. Still.
Yeah. Well, they interviewed John Madden one time, and he says, you guys kind of play a little rough and kind of illegal. And he says, well, what are you going to do about it?
But talk about playing with that defense that year.
Well, I went from a 4-3 to a nose tackle. So even though it's like a half a man or a man over, it's a completely different technique as playing as a nose tackle, because you get hit 2 or 3 times because you got those 2 inside linebackers. And Dave Martin was there, and Phil Villapiano. So you were around some great players, and that lifted your game up also, I think, psychologically, to be able to contribute to that defense and be able to be part of that. And Dave Rowe was a phenomenal nose tackle. He was, you look at that Super Bowl game they won against the Vikings, Mick Tingelhoff couldn't handle it. And Dave wasn't a guy who ran from sideline to sideline, although he had some great ones, but they did nothing up that. And hopefully you can find a picture of Dave Rowe, and he was a tremendous nose tackle. So Dave and I were great friends. And then, then they traded him, and then I was there for a year, and then the following year they traded me to New York, and that's a whole nother story. But being part of the Raider organization, and then going out there now, once a Raider, always a Raider, and they believe it and they live it, and it's a great experience. And I love the Raiders, and I probably consider myself a little more of a Raider than I do with a Packers, I guess, and just because of how the Raiders do their alumni and what they do with their alumni. I love Green Bay and players up there, but boy, and then I go off to New York because there was a defensive tackle named Troy Archer who unfortunately had a car accident, got killed, and they needed a 4-3 tackle, and so John was gone, and Tom Flores was there his first year, and we had 3 nose tackles: myself, Dave Pear, and a guy named Richie Kinlaw, who they just drafted.
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma. And so they were going to put him on taxi squad, and they're going to rotate Dave and I. There's Big Dave, and so he had a great training camp, and so I became expendable, and they got whatever they got for me, and then my family came out. I paid for that. We paid for all expenses. So I finally, got them a place, and then a week later, I'm flying to Newark, New Jersey, to play for the.
One other thing, what was it like playing with the assassin?
Oh, Jack Tatum was very quiet, and he was tough. I mean, I think Al Davis was also a great marketing, and they had a great marketing, Al Locosal, and they put these symbols on these guys. And when you get to know them, Jack Tatum was a phenomenal football player. He was a quarterback in high school, and he just knew how to play the game. He played it hard. And unfortunately, I was there when Darryl Stingley got hit. That was a clean hit. There was nothing wrong with that hit. Unfortunately, those things do happen. And Jack was really not the same player after that, I don't think. And he never gave interviews. He never talked. He was just quiet. And then so he got the nickname the Assassin. And then there's Otis Sistrunk. He was a hoot. Then Big John Matuzak, and I got to know John very well. He's from Wisconsin. He grew up Catholic, and he was just kind of mad at the world. His sister had MS, and he took it out on everybody. I mean, this guy, I've never seen a physique like him. You talk about a 32-inch waist. He had a 32-inch waist.
Yeah. And he's 6'6", right? 280, small waist, big shoulders.
Yeah. But the problem with John is he didn't take care of himself. He just didn't, he didn't take care of himself physically, unfortunately. And that cost him a great career. But boy, when he was on. Nobody could stop him. Nobody could stop the guy. I mean, but you'd only have 5 or 6 plays a game. Is that the scouting report? You're going to have 5 or 6, anyone on the offensive line for the opposing team. We're just going to hope that he gets tired real quick and that we don't have to block him for the rest of the day. Yeah. His line, though, that it's hilarious when now you weren't with the Super Bowl. You joined him that following year. And by the way, 11-3, not a bad start with that team. But the Matuzak story goes a little bit like this. There was player curfew, and Matuzak was out and late to the meeting. And, hey, where you been? And everyone knew he'd been out all night. And he says to Madden, he goes, Coach, I was walking the streets making sure that all of our players were in the hotel and nobody snuck out. And the room erupted. Everybody laughed like crazy, and it was just a simple Tuzak line. Him and Phil Vipiano. Bam. Yeah. My first year is when we played Denver in Denver, and that's that Rob Lytle fumble. Mm-hmm. That one also brings back. We didn't talk about, unfortunately, about the Texas game. We're going to let that go because we're running out of time. But the Rob Lytle fumble was incredible. And Denver had a great team, and we're playing them in Denver. We win that game. We're in the Super Bowl. My first year out there, it's exciting. Family's excited, and they're all back in Oakland at the time. And so we go out there and play Denver. And I think it was on the 4-yard line. They ran Rob Lytle up the middle. Jack Tatum came and hit him. And the ball popped out, and I'm kind of getting up, and I see the ball on the 4-yard line, and I run over and pick the ball up. I hear no whistle, no nothing, and I'm running down the field. And I look over, and I see John Madden going like this, and I turned around. I was like on a 30-yard line, and the referees were going like this, and everybody's arguing. So the football's down there, and I came back, and I showed them the football. This was a fumble, and there was so much confusion, and that's when the phone call went from one of the head referees up to Pete Rozelle and Al Davis. We're in the same booth at the time. And they said, tell him the whistle blew. whistle did blow.
That was a hard-hitting game, too.
Oh, my gosh. It was incredible.
Yeah, that was a very – I remember that game. I was a senior in high school.
There you go. Now you get a little bit older.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was one of those things. There's great articles about it that was the worst call in NFL history. And it seemed like Oakland always had some of those calls, like the quarterback fumble in that playoff game when it was
right.
Yeah. I was also in the game against San Diego when Stabler threw the ball forward. If we're losing the game and he throws the ball forward and Pete Banasek kicks in the end zone and Dave Casper falls on it, we win the football game. That was my first game with the Raiders.
Was that really? Okay, so you won that one too.
Remember that game?
Yeah. That was that one. Yeah.
Well, Denver's always been a tough place. But the first time I played there, I ran around the field because the team, we come out of the locker room, and then we're supposed to take a lap, and then we go into these separate lines to go stretch. And I was out of breath, Mike. I mean, 5,000 feet, if you're not used to it.
Oh, it's unbelievable. You can't, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, you can't breathe.
No, you have the oxygen on the sideline. You can be, no matter what kind of shape you're in, if you're not used to it, it
doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Wherever they go, they'll play at mostly sea level. I think Carolina and Atlanta is actually third in the league in terms of elevation. Atlanta's like 1,200 feet or whatever it is. But long story short is, great crowd though. Gosh, and they hated the Raiders. What a stupendous rivalry.
Yeah.
A lot different than the Bears and the Packers, I would say. The intensity level was as high for any of those games. Kansas City too. Going to Kansas City, I think you swept them that year.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. The Bears Packers is another game. You throw out the records. Yeah. For whatever reason, just one of those things.
Now,
and the guys, culturally, you embrace that too. As a Packer and as a Bear, you embrace that game, and because it's going to be brutal. And the Bears were a very physical team. Of course, playing against Walter Payton, that was another interesting running back I had a chance to play against. Yeah, he was a phenomenal football player.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I'm blessed that I'm 76 years old. I can walk and talk and chew gum at the same time and still play pickleball. So I'm happy.
Now, did you play in Wrigley ever against the Bears?
My rookie year, we played Wrigley Field. Yeah. And we dressed in the concourse, and people were looking up and seeing us get dressed, and they had to put a cage when we came down because they were yelling at us. And we got on the field, and we take the opening kickoff, and we score. So I'm running out there because I was on the field goal protection team and the extra point protection team. I was the captain of the wedge, a punt return team. The captain of the wedges, I got hit harder on that than anything I did playing on the line.
Yeah,
and so we go running out there, and I'm at the right tackle, and Doug Buckus is going crazy. I mean, he's foaming at the mouth. So I go out there and I looked at him and I said, "Oh crap!" And he looked right at me. Oh, crap! He jumps in my gap. I said, "Oh shit!" And so I wrestled in high school. I'm not going to sit there and take a blow because all these guys sit there and boom, they take. So I got down there and ball snapped. And I took a step and I got underneath him and I hit him with everything I had. And I caught him underneath his pads, and my forearm went into his throat, and he's yelling, screaming at me. And so I'm just sitting there like this, and the ball's kicked, and we kick the extra point, and he pushes me, and I just kind of walked away. I said, I'm not going to link around with this guy, man. He was incredibly. He was so.
Well, another guy, much bigger in real life than what most people would imagine. He's a huge guy, especially back in the 60s when he first came in out of Illinois. Just an enormous human being. Yeah.
I played with Ray Nitschke too. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, so I get in the first exhibition game. He's in there, and he's no teeth. He took his teeth out, and bald-headed guy. And I said, "Oh my God, this is Ray Nitschke." And he goes, "Hey, rookie," he said, "Watch the pass, watch the run, watch the screen." And I says, "Well, Ray, is there anything else you want me to watch?"
Yeah.
Anything else? Yeah. So Ray and I became very good friends. He was a tremendous guy. Off the field, he was a great citizen, and he had 3 kids that he adopted, and met his wife at a bar, but they, and Vince Lombardi brought him in the early 60s, and they said, if you don't stop drinking, you're out of here. And he stopped drinking, bingo, and he became phenomenal, as you know, a phenomenal football player and a great citizen. Died too early. Died at 62 years old in Florida.
Yeah.
Heart attack. Yeah.
Question: who's the toughest offensive lineman you ever played against?
A guy named Gail Gillingham.
Ooh, he was a teammate, right?
Mm-hmm. Out of Minnesota. And Gail was one of these guys who started lifting weights when he was in Minnesota. And he had one of those small little waists, but very powerful, very quick. I think Gail was maybe 6'3" and a half, 270, 275. You can look that up for me, Vince, but he was very, very quick. And he came in 67, I think, under Lombardi. And I had to go against him every day. And so when I played on the game on Sunday, it was easy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Here's a guy who should be in a Pro Football Hall of Fame. Him and another guy named George Kuntz. George Kuntz is a teammate of mine from Notre Dame. He's not in the Football Hall of Fame. He should be. But Gail Gillingham, definitely. And then Dave Robinson didn't get in until they had the senior hall. Yeah, there he is. Oh, my God. Look at that. Yeah, that's Gail. Now, John Hanna was pretty good, too. Don't get me wrong.
No kidding.
Very little, some of these guys I played against. But Gail was special because, they had that Packer sweep. He could get out there. If you're a defensive back, you can't get away from him. And then amazing. Look at that. I never saw that picture of Gail before. I don't know if he's in pro football or is he in college, but yeah, that's him doing the squats.
Yeah. Too bad there's no weight on that. I mean, that's old school.
Yeah. I can't believe I survived going against. Real quick story. I don't know how much time we have, but I come in for the All-Star game. And I'm up with Al Matthews. Al became my roommate, teammate from Southern. So we drive up. We go to St. Norbert's College. Of course, Green Bay's in there for 2 weeks already. So I got it. I got in there, and I'm in that locker room, and I have my name. And this is the same locker room that Vincent Lombardi was in. And it just kind of hit me. I said, I'm really a Green Bay Packer. And I went out to that field, and we did our warm-ups, and then we did not the thud drill. We did the Oklahoma drill. So you had an offensive lineman, a quarterback, and a running back, and you had the two bags. And so Gil, I had no idea who this guy was. Who's Gail Gillingham? I have no idea. So nobody jumped up there. So I jumped up there. I'll tell you what, he hit me so hard. And I felt it in my ankle. And I said, what the heck who is this guy? He drove me off a little bit. He didn't put me on my back, but he drove me off. I said, so I got down, I got lower, and we hit a stalemate. I said, what the heck? I said, that's welcome to the NFL, Wow. Yeah. And he was a tremendous offense guard. He did not get the recognition he had. There's so many guys in the league that didn't get the recognition they have. And, Gail's definitely one of them.
Your time right quick with the Giants. We did, me and Harper did a video on this gentleman, Brad Van Pelt. Yeah.
Brad Van Pelt. Yeah.
Was he special?
He was special, but Harry Carson was special too in the middle. Harry was big boy. Boy, he was for a middle linebacker. He was incredible. George Martin was on that team. Phil Simms was a rookie at that time, and there was the nucleus of that Giant team was there until unfortunately we had Ray Perkins who killed us. We had three practices a day, and I have so many stories about that. And
watch out, Mr. We got some Alabama fans now. Roll Tide gonna be.
He was a wide receiver. How many times do wide receivers get hit during a game? What, 4, 5?
Doesn't matter to me, Mike. Ray Perkins did more to hurt the game than help it, in my opinion. Those 3 days, unbelievable.
Yeah, killed us.
And my final question of the day, and I'm gonna give it back to Hawk.
Right.
You go to Detroit.
Yeah. See, I knew you were going to bring that up. So people don't understand. How many years did you play? So I make it pretty simple. 7 with the Packers, 2 with the Rays, 2 with the New York Giants. And I didn't want to go into my Giants year that I got hurt, and I was on the temporary injury reserve. And Detroit wanted me, so they put me on. I told them, I said, I'll go out there and I'm not going to sue you guys, and I'll go through a practice. And you released me, and Detroit picked me up.
No, but my question was though. It wasn't so much a time. I want to know, what was that man like out of Hoofs, Texas, coming in as a rookie out of Oklahoma, watching Billy Sims on the practice field?
Billy Sims was phenomenal. I mean, he was right up there with the best of them. And I watched this kid, and I said, my goodness, because I didn't because I was already in Oakland at the time, and I never really played against Billy, and then became his teammate. And I watched him during the games. I said, my goodness gracious, this kid was phenomenal. And here's another one doesn't get the recognition that he should get. This was Billy Sims, and we one of my games of my career was 1980. It was Thanksgiving Day against the Bears, and all we had to do was beat them, and we're in the playoffs. And it was yeah.
Is that
17-7 halftime.
Stop.
Yeah, we lost. They scored. Vince Evans scored with seconds to go. I hit the extra point, went through. So now we're tied 17-17. So what do they do? The Bears win the toss. We kick off, and you know what they did, right? Vince, tell them what they did.
My boy took it to the house.
103 yards. And that was it.
To the house. Dave Williams, right?
And I don't know who it was, but whoever it was, they 103-yard kickoff return. And that's my last game in the NFL. It was Thanksgiving Day. And so we're going to play Green Bay the next game. And I was already back in Pennsylvania, and I had a racquetball club, I had a farm, and I was, I was back home, and so they just say, hey, Mike, we're not going to bring you back next year. So they gave me a game check, and I went home. I drove home after that game from Detroit to Erie. That was my last game in the NFL.
Wow. Well, Mike, you got a chance to play early on in Detroit. We mentioned the Chicago. Green Bay had the same thing, I believe, in Minnesota. All the teams in that conference, when they played on the baseball field, you're on the same side of the field during the game. You've got the 50-yard line is yours to the left, and theirs is to the right, correct?
Yep. Especially in Milwaukee. We played Milwaukee County Stadium. Then I think it was the same thing up in Minnesota. We were on the same, and we played in dirt. There was dirt on the field. I never played in dirt when I was in Notre Dame, and we there was part of the field was dirt.
Yeah,
this is the NFL. Yeah. That was kind of weird being on the same sideline.
Yeah, that was different for me the first time. We played in the last game in Milwaukee County Stadium. They have stopped doing that, and that was against the Falcons. Favre has a touchdown with 6 seconds left to go on a fourth down. But yeah, very unique where you're running by guys and you're bumping into them, and what do you do? Oh, they're just you almost have to have a traffic cop to make sure that guys didn't bump into each other and get all upset. But that was just part, again, the National Football League. You did better, and that last game check was better than your first, I would imagine. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. It was more than what I made my rookie year.
Well, no, I don't ask
not quite, but it was pretty good.
But 11 years, who'd have thunk it, right? Just this young kid, and getting a chance to be with some of the great teams. You mentioned even the Giants were. You could tell something was going on there. They were getting better.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
11
years. You look back at that career, and I'm very thankful for it, and I would do it all again. It would be nice to do it in today's salary range, but even going back then, because as you know, Harper, I do a lot of ministry work, a lot of prison work, and then speaking in a lot of schools now. So it's given me the platform for what I do today, even at the age of 76. I'm 76, which is hard to believe, and so it's given me that. It's still giving me that platform. They had no idea who I am when I played, but I played in the NFL. I was in Monterrey, Mexico, back in February. These young kids down there were sharp. They knew about the NFL, and they all loved the NFL just because I played in the NFL. They were just so excited to be part of the assembly program that I did down there in the Catholic schools in Monterey.
Yeah, well, and here's an interesting facet of that as well in terms of the ministry work that you do. Everyone says, "Oh, you're all loaded and great money and must do the gold, the girls, the glory, all that kind of stuff." There's a lot of stuff that people don't know. And I'm not talking about, a corruption, but there are challenges. There are tough times that you have to face that a lot of people, once they hear you explain that, I think it levels the playing field. And I use that pun on purpose so that now I can talk to you about anything. Right. I can talk to you about your drug addiction or the fact that you stole or, had a battery or assault battery, or you may have done something even worse, right? There's an issue. And you get to be with people at a different level because of that. There's respect because of the league, but there's also, hey, what tough times are like too, and maybe you can help this prisoner, this inmate, with some issues that they're having in their life. Is there any aspect of that is a part of what you do when you visit?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up with an alcoholic dad, and so there's some unique challenges with that. But even at Notre Dame, my freshman year, I remember going out one night and I wanted to be, with the guys, and I drank so much I passed out. I have no idea. I got back to my dorm room, and I'm embarrassed by that, and I never did it again. but I could have gone down some different paths, and which thank God I didn't. Yeah, we all go through tough times. I lost my wife almost 10 years ago, and that was pretty tough. 2013, she passed away. We had 42 years of marriage, cancer. That's life. We deal with stuff and every day, and I don't care who you are. And you look behind the curtain, no matter what kind of people you are, or what kind of money you have, or what kind of career. There's always everyone has a story of different things that happen in their life, and it's how you deal with those stories, how you deal with those situations in your life, and you just you take a hit and you keep on going. And that's what Jesus did for you and I. He took many hits, but he kept on going. And so that's to me is my role model. I've been very fortunate. I've got some great friends, and I'm dating a young lady. I wouldn't say young. She is young compared to me. 7 years old. So we're working through things with that, and so it's kind of interesting because she lost her husband 4 years ago in COVID, and so we deal with those things in life, and it wasn't for my faith and understanding and trusting that this life will end, but there's another life that's going to last forever. And that's because of what Christ did for you and I on that cross. And he died for you and I to pay the penalty for our sins. And that's unconditional. So right now, what I do is that Mike McCoy Ministries, I just basically go into Catholic schools right now. I've gone in a few prisons over the last 11 years. I was on Bill Glass's staff for 19 years, did a lot of prison work, did a lot of work in schools. But I'm just focusing in on those students in Catholic schools because I can still mention the word God in the Catholic school and they don't get mad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been doing that the last 11 years. And then, as you and I know, I saw you at a golf outing a couple of weeks ago, and I was telling you about how I feel today. I'm 76. I've had every joint replaced in my body. I have my right hip replaced twice. I have a thing, I'm wearing a patch called regenerating my stem cells. And that's been a blessing because I can continue to do what I'm doing because physically my body is healing itself through this light wave therapy. And it's been very phenomenal for me.
Mike, when I saw you 2 weeks ago, you had a smile on your face from ear to ear, and you didn't know that I was watching. And it wasn't for me, obviously, but you were just walking around. You've lost some weight. You don't have the limp, and maybe that's because of the surgery. I get it. But just to talk a little bit about, and I'm not selling a program to somebody, but you found something that is a cutting edge from a technological standpoint. It's easy to use, and it's affordable, in my opinion, to where there's ways that you feel better. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the company's called LifeWave, and it's been around 20 years. The CEO and the inventor is a guy named David Schmidt, and he gets all his inspiration from Scripture. 22 years ago, he developed an energy patch called the Energy Enhancer for the Navy SEALs. So he's developed different patches, and it's all light wave therapy. It's taking our body that emits light, and it's a patch. It looks like a Band-Aid, and it's a lattice form that he's put together with some oxygen and water and hydrogen. And he invented these patches. He's got a patent on this patch, and the company spent 10 years and $5 million getting the X39 to market to where the FDA said, okay, it does what it does, and it stimulates a copper peptide called GHK-Cu, and that's the only peptide that regenerates stem cells. It's like $3 a day. And I looked at stem cell shots when I lived in Florida. I said, I'm not taking these shots. They're number one, very expensive. I don't know where those stem cells are coming. Now I can do my own stuff, my own stem cells, but maybe that doesn't work as well from my understanding, but it's thousands of dollars. I've been wearing this patch for a year and a half, and I play pickleball. I have pain. I get hurt. I fell down, 3 days ago on a pickleball court, and I went home and I patched up, and 90% of the pain was gone. I'm still recovering from the fall, but it wasn't as if I didn't have those patches to take away that pain. I'd still be limping around. I'm not limping now. I worked out when I'm up here in North Carolina with my daughter, you can pray for her. She's has breast cancer, and she goes under surgery June 3rd, and hundreds and thousands of young ladies and women across the country have breast cancer. So we're going through that, and what will sustain us is our faith. And but this patch is incredible, and it's lifewave.com and / Mike McCoy. If you ever want information on it, it's right there. It's life changing. We have over 58 former Notre Dame football players on the patch, and we had one guy named Jim Seath who was in Desert Storm, and he played for Notre Dame. And a year ago, he was going through some CTE things, and he had a a hole in his big toe, and the VA was going to cut it off. They couldn't cure it. So Joe Fazio, who's a friend of mine, played at Notre Dame. He's a businessman, got me involved, and he got Jim a patch a year ago. Within 3 months, his toe was healed, and his CT went away. And I just hear miracles every week being part of this. I'm a distributor now because I believe in it so much, and it's just it's been very, very rewarding. Not only rewarding my life to help people spiritually, but now rewarding to help people physically. There's one guy named Tom, and he was 12 Tylenol a day. He was in a wheelchair. Within 3 months, he was out of the wheelchair and no more Tylenol. His vision's coming back, his sight's coming back. And once you regenerate those stem cells, because we lose most of them when we're old, but at age 30, you lose them. But these other patches, these energy enhancer patches, I have a grandson who's 6'3", 250, and he's a South Carolina heavyweight champ, solid muscle. And he used the patches when he was wrestling. He said, Papa, he said, I didn't get tired very much. I said, I know. Yeah. And these patches take that light wave and they reflect it back into our bodies. It's non-transdermal. And that one goes right into the cells, into the mitochondria that gives the cells energy. It's all natural.
There's a tremendous amount of science that most folks don't understand when you talk about the mitochondrial era and that kind of stuff. You're getting so deep. And there are some critics. I know this, Mike. I've been around long enough to where if a Western medicine doctor doesn't like what you're doing, they're going to say this is garbage and you shouldn't trust it.
Absolutely. Especially the pharmaceutical companies now.
Yeah, they're going to spend a lot of money to go forget it, unless they buy the patent and then they can produce it themselves.
Yeah,
which would change the price. But how did you come across it? Was somebody just
Joe Fazio, a friend of mine from Notre Dame, played for Notre Dame. He's a tight end out of New Jersey, and I've known Joe for like 4 or 5 years. And Rich Tolman, who played at Notre Dame when I was there, they got on the patch, and he had a sister who had MS and was helping her MS. And we're not supposed to say that because you can't say that FDA doesn't like that. So she had a neurological problem, but it helped her.
Well, and full disclosure is it doesn't. You will make a full disclosure. Whatever.
The patch doesn't cure anything. It just sets the body up as a holistic state to heal itself. And the testimonies are phenomenal. And so he got me on the patch, and I had a lump on my wrist, and I had an cyst, and I couldn't even touch my wrist. It was so tender. And I put the patch on there 2 days, the pain was gone. I said, there's something going on here. My left shoulder that I had replaced was hurting me. I put the patch on. Within 2 weeks, I could sleep on the left side of my shoulder. And my hair is growing back. I'm 76. And the skin, a lot of people say my skin, actually I produce my own collagen now. The patch does that. The whole body is just is healing itself, and not only organ-wise, but tissue-wise, bone-wise.
And so a friend of yours, a former teammate, says, hey, Mike, I just found something. Yep. And being in the right place at the right time, you were receptive to it. In Lifeway is the name of the company. Is that correct?
Lifeway, LIFEWAVE, lifewave.com / Mike McCoy. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for the plug, Harper.
Well, that's part of what you're doing in your life right now, and I know you were adamant about it. And the research that I've done is, wait a second, there's something here, and especially, in my opinion, Mike, 5 years ago, stem cell was something that I was, oh my God, I don't get it. This could be horrible, cloning, all this other kind of stuff. But from a medical perspective, if there's a way for you to get your cells to do what they were designed to do, I want to know more about it.
Yep, absolutely. We'll get you on the patch soon, Harper.
If you can get the pain to go away, and that the Harvard study that I'm a part of, that is the number one issue for everybody, former players, that is.
Yeah, I've been on part of that too, yes.
Absolutely. And you get that, well, why would it be just players? Why wouldn't it be the general population? And I would imagine, Mike, that our drug problem in the United States, which is severe, and I'm not just talking about the heavy illegal drugs. I'm talking about all kinds of different ways that people medicate themselves to feel better. That's why you go to a doctor in the first place, isn't it? Hey, doc, I don't feel good. Help me. Give me 2 of these. I'll take them, and I'll see you in the morning. Right? That's the way America has been brought up. But there's so many other options that are available, and again, all natural. This is getting your cells to do what they were designed to do, and to repair the brain wave and the cellular level the neurological aspect of it. It's fascinating science, and people should be exploring it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, other than that, Mike, I know you're coming back from North Carolina. What keeps you busy?
Well, I'm scheduling my fall visits for the schools. It's a lot of phone calls, speaking to principals, trying to get people to help, volunteers in the areas to do my schedule for the fall and the spring. So it's very, very, very busy time with that. The X39 has been very busy also. I'm doing some meetings for people now, just getting the word out and building an organization with X39 and loving it. And but one of the frustrations I have, I said, well, wait a minute, why don't you go on this? It's only $3.35 a day, and this is what it does. And here's the science. And they've studied this copper peptide for 50 years, and Dr. Lauren Picard. And I don't understand why everybody I talk to that doesn't even jump on it. But that's their choice, obviously. But yeah, it's been very busy with that. And, I got 16 grandkids, so that keeps me a little bit busy. And just working out and just keep on keeping on and speaking a lot.
Well, Vincent, I need to let you know that Mike's busy schedule, I wanted to give him the opportunity to spend time with his daughter, which he is doing. He'll be leaving later today, but we were going to try to reschedule this for another Wednesday. His schedule's so busy. You went out just 2 or 3 weeks now. I don't know when we're going to be able to do this, so let's make it happen today. And I'm grateful that we are. Yeah. But it's a testimony to what here you are in your mid 70s, and every day you're plugging away and doing something. And I'm sure the patch is helping with your energy level and your
incredible. It took 5 months. My energy level went out the roof.
Yeah.
Can I give my ministry website up? Is that okay?
Yeah, please do, Mike. Yeah, obviously.
It's McCoy77.com. So if you want to learn more about the ministry with Catholic schools, we don't charge anything. It's a ministry. I've got a great board, great people who support what we do. So I'll be happy to come into your school and do an assembly. And also all my contact information is on there also.
Yeah, McCoy77.com. And Mike, for all that you've done for
Vince, you're good. I don't know who's doing that in the background, but
that's Logan.
Logan. Is that Logan? Okay,
hey,
Logan.
Hey, you're wearing your Raider jersey more than you wear anything else, right? You love it. There's a lot of Notre Dame get-togethers, aren't there?
Yeah, that's my Notre Dame jersey. 77 was my number.
Oh, it is. I'm sorry. It looked like a black jersey from the.
Yeah. It's faded blue.
Can I give one more comment?
Absolutely.
Please. Our producer Logan Landers is a diehard Oakland Raiders fan.
Ah, wow. All right. Yeah, there are a lot of them around the country. It's amazing. Yeah. That actually, those pictures were from my first assembly I did in a little town in Illinois. Yeah.
Well, there are plenty of those in an average conversation that you have. What, about an hour that you get?
Yeah, assembly. Yeah, 6th through 7th grade is an hour. Decisions determine our destiny. And then I do grade 3 through 5, and I never really wanted to do younger kids because I don't do balloons and all that stuff. But God just impressed on me, take some of these concepts and figure something out. So we do a 35-minute assembly, kind of a sit-down chit-chat with 3rd through 5th. And it's the value worth of a person through God's eyes. Because I really believe at that point in time, between that 3rd, they're starting to formulate who they are. And we kind of talked about that in the beginning. And they're getting their information from their phone, from their culture, from their friends, instead of really from God. And I said, who are you really in God's eyes? You have value and worth in God's eyes. Because a lot of these kids feel they don't have value and worth. The suicide rate's out the roof right now. The drug problem is still there in our culture. But we're starting to see a little turnaround. And it's amazing if you looked at the NFL this past year, how many players gave credit to God during those interviews. I was like, wow, I've never seen that in a league before. That was pretty impressive for me to hear them talk about their faith and how God has worked in their life.
Right. And understanding who you are, because the world's not going to teach you that. They're going to avoid teaching you your spirit, soul, and body, all of that, and how it encompasses what you do, the decisions that you make, and where you can go with your life.
Exactly.
Obviously one of the most important things. Well, Mike, thank you so much.
Oh gosh, can't believe this 2 hours went by so fast. I hope I didn't talk too much, Vince.
No, you was very excellent. Learned a lot. very grateful that you came on 100 Yards of Football today. We're very blessed.
Yeah, thank you for
And
inviting me.
I'm going to say something to you. Many blessings to your daughter, because I had a baby sister that had breast cancer that survived. So God is with you. But hey, what can I say? I'm like a kid in the cookie jar. I'm so blessed today. I have a former NFL great that's doing so many great things. And keep strong with your ministry, because our youth needs help and direction. Thank you, Mr. McCoy.
Well, thank you, Vince. I appreciate it. Thank you, Harper. Good seeing you again. It's been a long time. You haven't changed much. You actually you got thinner. You look great.
Well, Mike Kent, of all people, told me once, said, "Hey, Mike, do you lift 400 pounds on your back anymore?" He goes, "I don't need to do that anymore, and I don't need all the weight. It's easier to push the plate away, just because." But thank you for noticing. Well, everyone that's been a part of today's show, we appreciate you being. Yeah, go right ahead, Vincent, please.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but before you end today, can you tell Logan we got something special for Mr. McCoy?
Oh, of course, Logan. Are you ready? Logan, our producer and engineer.
I'm ready. Hold on here. Let me get it going here.
Hold on a second.
Oh, there you go.
You have to stand and salute, Mike. For old Notre Dame, wake up the echoes, calling her name. Send a volley, cheer on high.
Yeah. I must have heard that song 100,000 times. It's always great to hear it again.
It doesn't. It was funny with the recent success that the Irish had going into the playoff and being a part of that. I think the crowd was smaller. And that's one of the things about college football that I think we're going to struggle with is which game do I go to? I can't afford to go to all four of these playoff games when you got a 12-team playoff, and it gets any bigger than that. But pretty cool seeing the Irish do as well as they did this past year.
I loved it. I loved the playoffs and how they structured it this year. Really, it was very exciting.
And now, as a fan, which game would you go to? Because you don't know if they're going to win and go to the next one, right? Indiana was at home, and then the Texas game was on the road. Right.
Yeah. That's why I watch it on TV. That's why I have a 70-inch TV.
Well,
you can't fit in those seats. It's hard to fit in those seats in the stadium. Because everybody stands. You can't see the game.
And you don't want to have to stand for 3 hours. You can do that at home. And then
I went to the Georgia Tech Notre Dame game. Where Notre Dame gave me tickets. I was in the last row, way up high.
Were you really?
Yeah. And the guys looked like about 3 inches tall.
Yeah, you need binoculars from Bobby Dodd Stadium.
Oh, yes. Enjoyed it.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. We appreciate it for all that you've done for high school, for college, and for professional football, and obviously with your ministry. For you helping young people and just trying to help them get their lives right. We thank you and applaud you for all of that. And thank you for being a guest on 100 Yards of Football. We'll end today just by saying, Mike McCoy, what a unique and special friend to have here on the show. And we appreciate his time. We want to value that. So for Vincent Turner, our co-host and founder, for Logan Landers, our producer and engineer, I'm Harper LeBel saying thank you, everybody, for tuning in to 100 Yards of Football. This has been our show with Mike McCoy. We appreciate you greatly. Have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you.